So here's my scrapbook come sketchbook for where I started working on Mallow, and I've done a little bit of research about the plant itself. I took quite a lot of photos from a little place I know in Norfolk, but this plant is probably common across the country. Apparently particularly likes coastal areas, and it's certainly very common. It's got these fabulous flowers that are almost hibiscus-like. Very exotic for such a common flower that's seen by the side of paths. This particular one has to be cut back on a regular basis because otherwise it would just take over. I particularly like the buds. They're very soft and hairy, and they have these kind of plate-like closures over the bud with a threefold leaf, sort of trefoil type arrangement around the outside, and it's very geometric. But it's also soft in that because it's hairy, it catches the light around the edges. So if I had a play with that. I had quite a play with the layout because I would normally do this as a 4x5, but it made it very difficult to include buds, and I really wanted to do that. So I had another think and decided I would go with a square shape, but I then also played around with the size of this flower so that there's slightly less gap here and here, and it dominates the space more. And I did that by playing around with it, cutting and pasting, and eventually sticking it down, and then playing with the coloured photos, just fiddling around with the contrast and seeing what effect that would have in some areas rather than all the way across the photo. So this is my final arrangement that I'm going to base it on. I then transferred the shapes to my nice paper. So this is the first stage of the painting Mallow. I've traced the outlines on. This painting is actually going to be a square piece. I don't often work square, but when I played with the composition, I felt that that would be the best way to show the flowers and the buds. More oblong presentation lost the buds, and I think they're really interesting, so I want to get one in at least down here. The next stage is to choose my colours, and I've got a strip here ready, so I'm going to do that on time lapse because it's not massively exciting to watch normal speed, and then I'll go from there. I've now got the base layer across the whole of the paper. So you can see these areas that are white have actually got a layer of white on. So the whole of the paper is now covered. Mostly in very pastel tones because I'm going to build from there. The next step is to go back over some of these areas and redefine the lines so that I can see what I'm doing clearly. And then to start to build the interim layers. So not necessarily all the fine details yet, but some of them, just so that I know where I'm going. And working on some of the areas that need darkening up so that we've got some contrast going on. And again, I'm going to do that on time lapse. Okay, so I've reached the stage where I've got the background nearly how I want it. I think some areas will need adjusting. I did have trouble, particularly with this area, although it's looking better now. And at one point I scraped off all the oil pastel that I'd applied and reapplied because it just wasn't working. It looks a lot better than it did. I'm quite pleased with that. I think it's going to need darkening up in some of these areas, but in order to work out what to adjust to get the best out of the background, I need to put some serious work in on the foreground. You can see I've started down here bringing in the bolder colours so that I've got an idea of how they will affect the rest of the painting, and that's really the next stage, to work on that. I've possibly made a mistake with painting this, because having got the background done, I intended to work up the foreground, which you can see here, but not quite as far as I have done. I got a bit carried away. I really should have worked on this earlier, and I think subconsciously I've been putting it off because it's quite complicated, as you can see from the photo here, and getting this right is going to be quite a challenge. I'm a bit concerned that I will end up ruining the whole painting while I do it. So I'm going to use my magnifying glass, which you can't really get the benefit of terribly well on camera, because it actually I can intensify the light, which will help, and you can't really tell from the screenshot here how much it magnifies it, but it makes it about twice the size, which helps a bit. The difficulty then is you tend to get a bit fiddly, and if you're not careful you can start overworking areas and getting too wound up in detail, which Sennelier oil pastels are not really designed for. Even with all the little tricks and techniques that I use, there's a limit as to how fine you can go before really you start needing pencil, which I don't particularly want to use. I might use a little in there just to define some edges, but I'm going to put this on time lapse and see how we get along. So last time I spoke to you, I was a bit concerned about whether I'd be able to work on this area successfully. And actually I'm pretty pleased with the way that's come up. It looks sufficiently like it should. And on the whole, I think it's going to work. It needs a little bit more done to it. And the one on the other flower isn't quite finished yet. It needs a little bit more down here where the flower's getting darker. But on the whole, I'm fairly pleased with the way they've worked out. So I think I can sigh with relief and then start working on the background. I also think I need to soften this contrast edge here and this one here, because it's making the flower look a little bit unnatural. So I think that edge just needs loosening up a little bit, and I shall have to work out a way of doing that successfully. I'm just about to take off the protective edging of this painting, but I thought I'd just show you. I've softened some of these edges so it looks a bit less like a book illustration and a bit more painterly. I've added a little bit more interest in the background but kept it soft with blurred edges because I don't want it competing with the foreground. And I think it's reached the point where it's time to stop. A painting is never complete, they say. It's only ever abandoned. I think this one is as near to complete as is likely to happen. I might, over the next few days, I'm going to leave it propped up somewhere where I can see it, but over the next few days I might look at it and think, oh, that needs adjusting, because sometimes things suddenly jump out at you when you're not concentrating on it and looking at it quite so hard. But other than that, I think it's done. I shall need to put my mark on it, probably somewhere around here or here. And eventually, when it's had, the surface has had a little bit longer to settle, I need to spray it with fixative. But beyond that, it's finished.